He was 30, a CEO, a single father, and tonight, on a blind date he never wanted, his whole life was about to change. She wasn't supposed to be more than the maid serving dinner. But one unexpected moment of kindness was about to undo everything he thought he knew about love. In a room full of wealth and small talk, the only real connection he felt all night was with the woman nobody else even noticed. She wasn't invited back for another event. She was invited back because his daughter, Haas, and his heart, Haas, hadn't stopped asking about her. A tabloid tried to destroy them, fear almost won. But he showed up anyway, huh? Because real love doesn't disappear when things get hard. It fights.
If you had told Adrian Cole, on the morning of his 30th birthday, that within 6 months he would fall in love with the maid who served him dinner on a blind date, he would have laughed you out of his own boardroom. But love, real love, never asks permission. It simply arrives, quietly, in an apron and a pair of tired shoes, and changes everything. Before we go any further, if stories like this one move you, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because there is so much more heart-wrenching, hopeful storytelling waiting for you here. Now, let's begin. Adrian Cole was the kind of man magazines loved to photograph, and normal people loved to resent. At 28, he had taken over Cole Dynamics, his late father's engineering empire, and in 2 years he had doubled its valuation. He wore success like a tailored suit, effortless and cold. But behind the glass walls of his penthouse office, Adrian carried a weight no press release ever mentioned. He was a single father to a 6-year-old girl named Lily, who had lost her mother in a car accident when she was barely 2. Since that night, Adrian had built 2 lives that never touched: the ruthless CEO who negotiated hostile takeovers without blinking, and the exhausted father who read bedtime stories with a voice cracking from fatigue, terrified of doing it all wrong. Every morning followed the same exhausting ritual. Adrian would wake at 5, answer overnight emails from investors in Tokyo and London before the sun rose, then rush to braid Lily's hair badly enough that the nanny would quietly redo it the moment he left for the office. He kept a framed photo of his late wife Sarah on his desk, not out of lingering grief exactly, but out of a kind of quiet apology, a reminder of a promise he felt he was failing every single day, the promise to raise their daughter with warmth instead of spreadsheets. He told himself that providing for Lily financially was its own form of love, the only form he trusted himself to execute without making some catastrophic mistake. It was easier to believe that than to sit with the harder truth, that he was afraid of being present, afraid that if he let himself feel too much, the grief he'd buried under acquisitions and quarterly reports would finally catch up to him. His sister, Nora, had watched him disappear into his work for 4 years. She loved him too much to let it continue. "You're turning into Dad," she told him one evening, watching him answer emails while Lily colored quietly at the kitchen table, waiting for a father who was there, but not really there. "Dad worked himself into a coffin and missed our entire childhood. I won't watch you do that to Lily." Adrian brushed her off the way he brushed off every uncomfortable truth, with a joke and a change of subject. But Nora was relentless. She signed him up, without his knowledge, for a blind date through an exclusive matchmaking service that catered to the city's elite. When Adrian found out, he was furious. When she refused to cancel it, he agreed to go, if only to prove to her that it would fail and she would finally stop meddling. The dinner was arranged at Adrian's own penthouse, a private, discreet setting befitting a man who valued control above all else. The matchmaking service handled everything, including hiring a small catering staff for the evening. That staff included a woman named Maria Santiago. Maria was 26, though the exhaustion in her eyes sometimes made her look older and the stubborn brightness in her smile sometimes made her look younger. She had left college 2 years earlier when her mother was diagnosed with early-stage kidney stone disease, taking on double shifts as a maid and event server to pay for treatments insurance wouldn't cover. She was not bitter about it, not exactly. She had simply learned to fold her dreams into a small drawer in her heart and focus on getting through the week. That night, she was assigned to serve dinner in Unit 4501, one function among dozens on a long list, nothing that stood out. She had no idea whose name was on the reservation, and honestly, she didn't care. Rich clients rarely looked at her long enough to remember her name anyway. She was wrong about this one. Maria had grown up 2 neighborhoods away from the glass towers she now cleaned and served in A modest house with peeling paint and a mother who worked as a seamstress until her hands could no longer manage the fine stitching. Maria remembered, as a girl, pressing her face to the bus window on trips downtown, staring up at buildings like the one she'd eventually work inside, wondering what kind of lives happened behind all that glass. She had been accepted into a state university on a partial scholarship to study social work, driven by a desire to help families like her own navigate a system that seemed designed to grind people down quietly and efficiently. Her mother's diagnosis had arrived like a wrecking ball through those plans. Maria withdrew from classes with a promise to herself that it was temporary, a promise she repeated so many times over 2 years that it had started to feel less like hope and more like a lie she told to fall asleep at night. She did not resent the work itself. She took pride in doing it well, in leaving every room she cleaned a little better than she found it, in remembering small details about the people she served even when they never remembered her name. But some nights, riding the last bus home with aching feet, she allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of grief for the life she'd paused, and not 1 minute more. Adrian's date, a poised woman named Celeste who ran a boutique PR firm, arrived 20 minutes late, already checking her phone before she'd even sat down. Adrian, dressed impeccably but internally counting the minutes until this obligation ended, barely registered her small talk about wine regions and yacht clubs. He was distracted, restless, his mind circling Lily, who was at home with the nanny, probably already asking when Daddy would be back to read her the dinosaur book for the 100th time. It was Maria who broke through the fog. She entered with the first course, moving with a quiet, practiced grace that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with respect for the work itself. When she set the plate in front of Adrian, she noticed his shoulders were rigid with tension, his jaw tight the way people's jaws get tight when their mind is somewhere else entirely, somewhere heavier than a dinner table. Instead of retreating silently as she'd been trained to, she paused for half a second and said, softly, only to him, "The kitchen made the soup a little lighter tonight, sir, easier on a tired stomach." It was such a small thing, but nobody had said something so simply kind to Adrian in longer than he could remember. He looked up at her, really looked, and for the first time all evening, something in his chest loosened. Celeste didn't notice the exchange. She was mid-sentence about a rooftop event she'd attended in Monaco. Adrian nodded along, but his eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen doorway, toward the woman, with tired eyes and an unshakable gentleness, who moved through the room like she belonged to it, though she believed with her whole heart that she didn't belong anywhere near it. As the night went on, small moments accumulated. When Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from the nanny, Lily wouldn't once fall asleep without her stuffed rabbit, which was missing. Adrian's face flickered with quiet panic he tried to hide. Maria, refilling water glasses, noticed. "Check under the couch cushions," she said quietly as she passed. "Kids always lose things in couch cushions." Adrian blinked at her, startled that a stranger had noticed his private worry at all, let alone offered comfort. He texted the nanny the suggestion. 2 minutes later, found it. "Thank you." He looked up to thank Maria, but she had already moved to the next task, unaware she'd just eased the mind of one of the city's most guarded men. By the time dessert was served, Celeste was checking her phone under the table, clearly as unenthused about the match as Adrian was, and the date fizzled into a polite, mutual dismissal. She left first, citing an early flight, relief evident in her voice. Adrian stood at the window with his glass of wine, staring out at the city lights, feeling the familiar hollow ache of another obligation completed and another night alone. That's when he noticed Maria clearing the final dishes, moving efficiently, quietly, glancing at her phone the moment she thought no one was looking. The screen showed a message from the hospital billing department. Her expression, just for a flash, cracked with worry before she smoothed it back into professional calm. Adrian, more perceptive than people gave him credit for, caught it. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Maria startled, unused to being spoken to as a person rather than furniture. "Yes, sir. Just work things. Sorry, I'll be out of your way in a moment." "You don't have to apologize for existing in a room," Adrian said, more gently than he intended. "What's your name?" "Maria." "Maria," he repeated, and something about the way he said it made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you for the soup comment and the couch cushions." She smiled, surprised he'd remembered such a small detail. "I have younger cousins. Kids always lose things in couch cushions." It's basically a law of physics. He laughed, an unguarded, genuine laugh that surprised even him. It had been a long time since anyone had made him laugh without an agenda behind it. That should have been the end of it. A pleasant, forgettable exchange between a CEO and a server at the end of an unremarkable blind date. But 3 days later, Adrian found himself calling the catering agency directly, requesting Maria specifically for a small dinner event he invented on the spot, a client meeting that was really just Adrian wanting an excuse to see her again. When she arrived and realized there was no client, only Adrian and Lily eating pasta at the kitchen island, she felt a flush of confusion and, underneath it, something warmer she didn't want to name. "I don't understand," she said. "This isn't really an event." "No," Adrian admitted. "I wanted to see you again, and I didn't know how else to arrange it without making things complicated for you at your job. I'm sorry if that was inappropriate." Lily, unbothered by adult complexities, tugged Maria's sleeve. "Do you know how to make dinosaur shapes out of pancakes? Daddy tries, but they always look like blobs." Maria laughed, a real, bright laugh, and knelt to Lily's level. "I happen to be an expert dinosaur pancake architect. Want me to teach you?" That afternoon in the kitchen, flour dusting the counters and Lily's jiggles filling the penthouse that had felt too quiet for too long, Adrian watched Maria patiently guide his daughter's small hands, correcting her grip on the spatula, praising her lopsided triceratops pancake like it was a masterpiece. He realized, watching them, that he hadn't seen Lily this at ease with anyone new since her mother died, and he realized, with a jolt that unsettled him, that he hadn't felt this at ease either. Over the following weeks, what began as invented excuses to see Maria became honest ones. Adrian learned about her mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, the college degree she'd paused indefinitely, the quiet dignity with which she carried burdens most people her age never had to imagine. Maria learned about Adrian's father, a brilliant but distant man who had taught him that love was something you scheduled between board meetings, and about the guilt Adrian carried for not knowing, some days, if he was raising Lily right or in simply keeping her fed and alive while working himself into the same grave his father had dug. They fell in love the way people do when they aren't trying to, slowly, then entirely, in stolen afternoons and late-night phone calls and the particular vulnerability of being truly seen by someone for the first time in years. Adrian found himself leaving the office earlier, not later. Maria found herself smiling in the mirror before their meetings, feeling, for the first time since her mother's diagnosis, that her life could still hold something soft and good. But love, especially love that crosses such visible lines of class and circumstance, rarely goes uncontested. Nora, thrilled at first that her brother had finally softened, grew uneasy when she learned who the woman was. "Adrian, think about what people will say. The board already thinks you're too unpredictable since Dad died. If word gets out you're dating a woman who used to serve your dinner, then let them talk," Adrian snapped, surprising himself with his own certainty. Word traveled fast among Maria's co-workers at the catering agency, most of it unkind before anyone even knew the full story. A fellow server named Denise cornered her in the break room one afternoon, arms crossed. "You know how this ends, right? Guys like that don't marry girls like us. They just make us disappear quietly when they're done." Maria wanted to argue, wanted to describe the way Adrian listened, actually listened, the way he remembered things she'd mentioned only once in passing, the way he looked at her like she was the only interesting person in any room he'd ever stood in. But some small, frightened part of her worried Denise might be right, that she was building a fragile happiness on ground that could shift beneath her at any moment. She said nothing, only nodded, and carried the doubt home with her like an extra weight in an already heavy bag. The real trouble came from Adrian's board of directors, led by Marcus Whitfield, a longtime executive who had never trusted Adrian's witch youth and had been quietly maneuvering to install his own preferred successor. When rumors of the relationship reached him, Marcus saw an opening. He leaked a distorted version of the story to a tabloid, billionaire CEO, secret affair with his own maid, framing Maria as a gold digger who had engineered the entire relationship, twisting the innocent soup comment into a calculated seduction. The article spread quickly, cruelly. Maria's photo, taken without her consent outside her apartment, was plastered beside headlines mocking her uniform, her modest home, her mother's illness dragged into public view as if it were evidence of some scheme. Maria was devastated. She had spent her whole life trying to remain invisible enough to survive, and now she was visible in the worst possible way, reduced to a punchline, a scandal, a threat to a rich man's reputation. Her mother, weakened by illness and stress, was hospitalized after the shock of seeing her daughter's face across every gossip site in the city. Overwhelmed with guilt, believing she had brought chaos into Adrian and Lily's carefully protected world, Maria made the hardest decision of her life. She ended things. "I can't be the reason your company falls apart," she told Adrian, refusing to meet his eyes, refusing to let him see how much it cost her to say the words. "Lily doesn't need more instability. Neither do you." Adrian tried to fight for her, showing up at her apartment 3 separate evenings in a row, standing outside her door with takeout containers of the same soup she'd Sentry once mentioned, adjusting for a tired stomach, hoping the small gesture might say what his words hadn't managed to. Calling repeatedly, leaving voicemails he immediately regretted for sounding too desperate, or not desperate enough. He found himself, for the first time in his adult life, completely unable to solve a problem through sheer will or resources. There was no acquisition strategy for a broken heart, no quarterly projection that could account for the particular ache of watching someone you love disappear behind a closed door out of misplaced guilt. But Maria, drowning in guilt and exhaustion, wouldn't answer. She threw herself back into work, picking up every shift she could to cover her mother's growing medical bills, pushing the bitter memory of dinosaur pancakes and late-night phone calls into that same small drawer where she'd once folded away all her other dreams. The weeks apart tested Maria in ways she hadn't anticipated. She threw herself into extra shifts, telling herself the exhaustion was practical, necessary, purely about the medical bills, when really it was the only thing that kept her mind from replaying every moment she'd doze. Adrian and Lily. She caught herself, more than once, absent-mindedly folding a paper napkin into the shape of a triceratops, the way Lily had insisted all pancakes should look, before catching herself and setting it down, embarrassed by her own longing. Her mother watched all this from her hospital bed with the quiet, knowing patience of someone who had loved and lost and loved again, and said little, sensing that Maria needed to arrive at her own conclusions rather than be pushed toward them. Adrian, for his part, sank into a darker version of the isolation he'd known before Maria, except now it was worse, because he knew exactly what he was missing. Lily noticed. 6 years old and painfully perceptive, she asked one night at dinner, "Did Maria go away because of me?" The question broke something open in Adrian. He realized that in trying to protect his daughter from public chaos, he had let her believe, even briefly, that love could simply vanish because of who you were or where you came from, a lesson he refused to let her carry into adulthood the way he had. That night, he made a decision that terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever had. He would fight, publicly and unapologetically, for the woman he loved, regardless of what it cost him at Coal Dynamics. He canceled a merger call with a firm in Singapore that morning, something his assistant later told him had never happened once in his entire tenure as CEO, and instead spent the hour writing and rewriting what he wanted to say to the board, determined that whatever happened next would be decided on his terms, not Marcus Whitfield's. He called an emergency board meeting. Marcus Whitfield, confident he had already won, smirked as Adrian entered the room. But instead of resigning, as some had hoped, Adrian laid out, calmly and precisely, the falsified financial irregularities Marcus had been quietly orchestrating for over a year. Irregularities Adrian's immense legal team had uncovered while investigating the source of the tabloid leak. Adrian didn't just defend his personal life, he dismantled the man who had tried to destroy it, presenting evidence with the same cold precision he used in any hostile negotiation, except this time, the stakes were his own heart. Marcus was removed from the board within the week, and Coal Dynamics issued a public statement condemning the tabloid's fabrications, offering Maria a formal, public apology. But statements and board victories meant nothing if Maria wouldn't see him. Adrian went to the hospital where her mother was recovering, not as the CEO of Coal Dynamics, but simply as a man who loved someone. He found Maria in the hallway outside her mother's room, exhausted, guarded, surprised to see him there. "I'm not here to convince you of anything about the company," Adrian said quietly. "I already handled that. I'm here because Lily asked me if you left because of her, and I couldn't bear to tell her that love just disappears when things get hard. I don't want her growing up believing that. And selfishly, Maria, I don't want to live believing it either. Maria's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I was so afraid I'd ruin everything for you both. You didn't ruin anything, Adrian said. You're the only thing that's ever made it feel like it was worth fixing. Maria's mother, listening quietly from her hospital bed, weak but lucid, called out, Maria, honey, let the man finish his sentence. I didn't survive this illness just to watch you throw away someone who checks couch cushions for all missing stuffed rabbits. It broke the tension, and Maria laughed through her tears, the sound cracking something loose in both of them. Maria's mother, propped up against her pillows, added quietly, I watched my daughter fold her dreams into a drawer for 2 years so she could take care of me. I won't watch her fold away something good just because she's scared of what people will say. Fear is a terrible reason to let go of someone who checks couch cushions for missing rabbits. Adrian Cole. Sit down, both of you. Talk this through properly. They talked for hours in that hospital hallway, honestly, without the guardedness that had defined their entire courtship, about fear, about class, about the very real difficulties that still lay ahead of them, and about the fact that none of those difficulties mattered as much as choosing each other despite them. The following months weren't easy. Maria's mother's health slowly stabilized with proper treatment, now fully covered as Adrian quietly and without fanfare arranged her medical care, careful to frame it as something Maria could accept without feeling like charity, but as partnership. Maria eventually returned to finish her degree in social work, something she'd once believed was lost to her forever, with Adrian rearranging his own schedule, for once, around someone else's dreams instead of only his company's demands. Lily adored her, unreservedly, the way only children can adore without complication or fear. On the day Adrian proposed, not in some extravagant, camera-ready spectacle, but in the same kitchen where Maria had once taught Lily to make dinosaur pancakes, flour still faintly dusting the counter from that morning's Wet's breakfast, Lily was the one who handed Maria the ring box, grinning so widely she could barely get her words out. Daddy said you're gonna be my mom now, for real, not just pretend. Is that okay? Maria, crying and laughing at once, could only nod, unable to form words, holding both Adrian and Lily as tightly as her arms allowed. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Nora took Maria dress shopping, insisting on it as an apology of sorts for her earlier hesitation about the relationship. I was wrong to worry about what the board would think, Nora admitted, sitting beside a three-way mirror while Maria tried on the 4th dress of the afternoon. I should have been worried about whether you'd be good for my brother and that niece of mine. And you clearly are. He hasn't mentioned a single quarterly report in front of Lily in months. It's honestly suspicious. Maria laughed, smoothing the fabric at her waist, allowing herself finally to believe without reservation that this new life was really hers to keep. They married quietly the following spring in a small ceremony that included Maria's mother, healthy enough by then to walk her daughter partway down the aisle before handing her off, tearfully, to Nora, who had long since become one of Maria's closest friends. Adrian stepped down from day-to-day operations at Cole Dynamics soon after, restructuring the company so it no longer demanded the sacrifice of everything else in his life, determined not to repeat his father's mistakes. He and Maria eventually opened a small foundation together, funding medical bills for families who, like Maria's, fell through the cracks between insurance and desperation. A foundation staffed, fittingly, by people who understood exactly what it meant to be unseen. The foundation they built together grew slowly but steadily over the following years. It began as a modest fund covering emergency medical costs for a handful of families Maria had come to know through her work, but within 3 years it had expanded into a full nonprofit with a small staff, most of whom Maria hired personally, favoring people who understood firsthand what it meant to fall through the cracks of a system built for people who had never needed to worry about falling. Adrian, no longer buried under the day-to-day grind of Cole Dynamics, found himself present in ways he had once believed himself incapable of, coaching Lily's soccer team badly but enthusiastically, learning to make dinosaur pancakes without supervision, sitting across the breakfast table each morning without a single email open on his phone. He still ran Cole Dynamics, still made hard decisions in boardrooms when needed, but the company no longer devoured every corner of his life the way it once had, and he no longer mistook that devouring for devotion. Lily grew older, sharper, kinder, carrying within her an unshakable belief that love was not something reserved for people who matched in status or income, but something that simply recognized goodness wherever it appeared and chose to stay. She would, in later years, occasionally hear classmates repeat the same tired assumptions Denise had once voiced in that break room, that people from different worlds simply didn't wheat last, and she would smile, unbothered, thinking of her own parents' story, certain in a way only a child raised inside real love can be certain, that the assumption was simply wrong. Years later, Lily would tell people, without a trace of irony, that her mother was hired to serve teller dinner one night, and instead served up the truth her father needed to hear. That love doesn't check your job title, your bank account, or the uniform you wear to work. It simply notices you, quietly, the way Maria once noticed a tired man's shoulders across a dinner table, and decides, against every reasonable expectation, to stay. And perhaps that is the real lesson beneath every version of this story, however it unfolds in different lives. That the people who truly see us, who notice the small plies of unspoken weights we carry, and gently ease them without asking for anything in return, are rarer and more valuable than any title or fortune. Adrian Cole had everything money could buy long before he met Maria Santiago, but he didn't have someone who noticed when his shoulders were tense, or thought to mention that the soup was lighter that night, or checked under couch cushions for a missing stuffed rabbit. Sometimes, the richest man in the room is the one who finally learns to recognize that kind of wealth when it walks in wearing an apron, carrying nothing but kindness and a tray of soup, and has the courage, when everything threatens to tear it away, to fight for it anyway. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like it, because somewhere out there, someone else needs the reminder that real love always finds a way to stay.